Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Podcast Daily. Guess what? We're all back together to talk about Ohio State. That's Bill Landis, Jeremy Birmingham, and I am Austin Ward. And man, it just feels so good to have the three amigos back together. Or at least it does for me. I don't know about these two, but I don't really care.
It feels like it's been a while since we've done this, but I do want to give a hearty shout out to Canada for forcing us all to be inside. Therefore, we can't really have people out doing other things today. So, hey, way to go, Canada. Your fires are the lighting the cockles of my heart.
They have the world's best fires. I think we've always known that.
Yeah.
I hate Canada. I feel terrible.
I've got a little bit of a headache. My throat's a little froggy, but hey, we're just going to make it through.
It makes me even more relieved that the United States beat Canada in the Nations League Championship, because now they shouldn't have anything up there. I can't have any respect for that.
I think in exchange for Canada polluting us with this smoke, they should give Connor Bedard to the Blue Jackets.
I've always felt that should be the case, and I'm surprised that on Wednesday night nobody did that.
Weird.
Yeah, I don't know. I hope I'm wrong by the time that this posts, but I don't think that that's going to happen. But on Wednesday, Bill, you wrote an in-depth dive into Jim Knowles' track record for growth and development and improvement between year one and year two. I think there's a lot of interesting parts to that. Some of the stuff that we have talked about before with the pieces coming back for Ohio State, the staff, we'll dig into all of that and how it might relate to Ohio State specifically. But when you looked at Duke and Oklahoma State, what did you find?
Improvement from year one to year two. Duke kind of went from really bad to just kind of bad. Like they still weren't very good, but there was improvement in the areas I looked at were defensive efficiency, points per drive, available yards, which is a percentage of possible yards you could give up that you do give up, touchdown rate and first down rate, which is how often your opponent does those respective things against you on a particular drive. And Duke improved in all those categories. Oklahoma State made significant jumps from, again, like pretty bad in Jim Knowles' first year to more like middle of the pack in his second year. Neither one of them were exceptionally great defenses, but I think when you take that track record of improvement from the first year to the second year, and then look at the baseline that Ohio State is starting from, where it was last year in its first year under Jim Knowles, then I think you can talk yourself into the idea of them actually achieving this idea of being, I don't know if it's the best defense in the country, but one of the best defenses in the country, because while they were improved last year, I think they certainly ended up coming a bit short of that goal. But I think it's out there for them this year, because like Jim Knowles has just done this for a long time, and it does seem like for whatever reason, his system in year two, there is significant progress made.
I remember last summer we were talking about the 2022 Buckeyes, and I believe it was me who said that if the Buckeyes finished in the top 20 in defense, total defense, that they'd win a national championship. And I think they finished 21st or something like that. So they're very much on the cusp of being that way. And Bill, the one thing I thought was interesting is that both the second year leap that you showed, there was a 7% improvement in touchdowns allowed. And if Ohio State gave up 7% less touchdowns last year, I think they probably win the national championship. And so it is one of those things where the improvement has to come not only just from players getting more comfortable, but players being more experienced, players being stronger, players being better. Ohio State's going to need its defense this year to make a step up, because the offense is going to probably be, at least at the beginning part of the year, a little bit different than it has been. So they're going to need to see this defense step up if this season is going to reach its goals.
Yeah, they will. I think that was like the biggest thing that I thought Jim Knowles said when we spoke to the coaches at the end of May. He said, like, we want to be a top 5 defense, and that's fine. Put whatever number you want on it. I think I agree with you, Berman. If Ohio State has a top 20 defense with the offense that it's going to have every year, then it's probably going to be in pretty good shape. But Jim Knowles said they want to be accountable, a defense you can count on every week. To if the game transpires in a fashion that your defense needs to get the job done, we want to be able to be relied upon in that fashion. And I don't put all of the shortcomings on the defense last year. I think there's some arguments can be made that especially in the Peach Bowl, like that third quarter of the Peach Bowl, they shut the door on Georgia, and Ohio State had a chance to pull away and they didn't. So it goes both ways, but I think that is generally the idea is if a game presents itself where Ohio State needs to hang its hat on defense, then Jim Knowles thinks that given his track record and what they have coming back, they can get there this year.
That's what I think is was really interesting, Bill, when you looked at the Oklahoma State stuff specifically, is that I would have thought, well, he inherited a bunch of new players and then they became more veteran. He had a bunch of returning starters. They probably learned and adapted and grew. And that wasn't necessarily the case. I believe what you found were just 4 returning starters in year 2. So obviously a lot of reserves maybe they got experience in year 1 and they step forward in year 2, play bigger roles. That's part of it. I'm not trying to make too big a deal out of just one stat, but 4 returning starters is not the kind of number that leaps off the page and says, wow, that should really lead to dramatic improvement from year 1 to year 2 as they know the system. Those are the ones that you're relying on. By comparison, like Ohio State's going to have 6 plus, a pretty decent handful of reserves who now have a better feel for the system. So at least in that regard, and you alluded to this earlier, the Buckeyes and Jim Knowles may be in better situation to ramp up that learning curve this year than even those Cowboys or certainly Duke was.
Yeah, I don't know what situation Duke was in because I couldn't go back that far. That was the 2010-2011 season. I couldn't look at the personnel numbers from those years to figure out exactly where Duke was, but I could find it for Oklahoma State, and I was a little surprised by that. I thought that there would have been significant carryover. I know that by the time they were in his 4th year, when they were maybe the best defense in the country, there were guys playing in that defense that had played in it for 4 years. I think quite a few of them had played in it for 4 years, but that second year jump did not come, as you said, with a bunch of returning starters. And like they lost the entire starting defensive line. They returned 1 linebacker, I think 1 safety, and that was it. And you look at where Ohio State is, like not only does Ohio State return more starters just overall, but it has them at every level of the defense. And I think maybe most importantly, or maybe safety would be more important, but having like a Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers back in the middle of that defense to sort of be the heart of it, I think positions Ohio State to take a similar step, if not a bigger step forward than Jim Knowles' defenses have taken in their second year. And then you also add on the fact that they are just immensely more talented than most of the teams are going to play week to week, and which was not the case at Oklahoma State. And I think you become even more confident in the idea that they are going to make that jump.
I think last season felt so like broken in half. There was 3 games really where the defense looked like they didn't belong on the field, and that was Penn State at times, Michigan, and Georgia. And the rest of the time, even in the Michigan game, they were pretty good defensively outside of the 5 big plays. And the Georgia game, they were pretty good defensively outside of the big plays. And I know that people may scoff at that. You gave up a lot of yards, but I don't care about yards. I care about points. So if you give up 24 points to Michigan, you win that game, and no one cares that they have, a couple of broken pass plays to the tight end or whatever. Georgia gets 550 yards, but if they don't hit the final one of the day, they finish at 475 yards and you're in the national championship game. So who cares about that? But like, it's about having the pieces there that are able to be healthy. And I think that's, to me, where this Ohio State defense is in a position to make the biggest jump from year 1 to year 2, because these players are so much more talented than what he's had at Oklahoma State or Duke or anywhere else. The idea that they're going to suddenly feel more comfortable in the defense, I don't think that really is the case, as Austin said. Like, to me, this is about availability. This is about Jordan Hancock being back and healthy. It's about a healthy Mike Hall. It's about Jack Sawyer in his correct position. It's about Lathan Ransom having an opportunity to be set in one spot. It's about how you deploy Sonny Styles. Like, the way that this defense gets better is by having better players on the field more often. And last year, it sounds like an excuse, but when you're playing with 3 cornerbacks and 2 of them are hurt, rotating in and out of this all year, like, that's a bad situation, and teams took advantage of that.
I think that's what makes it a little bit challenging, maybe, to evaluate year 1 for Jim Knowles, because I've said I believe that improvement already existed for Jim Knowles and that they took significant steps forward. And I certainly understand why people want to look at the second half against Michigan and the fourth quarter against Georgia and say it wasn't good enough. That's a fair evaluation to make. It wasn't, but in the grand scheme of things, if you look at what Ohio State and Jim Knowles accomplished in that first year, it was pretty darn good. And I think once you add in the context of, if you got to see Mike Hall for more than 7 snaps or 10 snaps a game, what that looks like, or if I mean, some of this is not injury related. Jack Sawyer was basically playing out of position in that Jack role, and it didn't suit him. And if that's a personnel adjustment from year 1 to year 2, that's fine too. That would lead to improvement. But healthy Denzel Burke, healthy Jordan Hancock, that's pretty significant all by itself. Figuring out, defined roles for Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers to let them take that into a second year when they were already playing at a high level, that's a big deal. Another year of growth and development for JT Tuimoloau, or getting Mitchell Melton back. I can go down the list, but even once you add that in, it still makes me think that what happened in year 1 was a lot more impressive than perhaps Jim Knowles tends to get credit for. If anyone feels otherwise, that's fine too. But I don't think that there was any cause coming out of year 1 to say, oh, I don't know if Jim Knowles gets it. I think that he does, that it just didn't have to necessarily get all the way to a national championship to be considered a success. I don't feel that way.
I think you feel the way that most people should feel about it. It's like, you can, even for this story, like I pulled a bunch of stats to help make my point, and when you can pull other stats that make Ohio State's defense last year look pretty similar to the one before it, and that's fine. I guess that's the beauty of statistics. You pull the ones that make your argument for you and ignore the other ones. But if you just had been watching Ohio State over the last 4 years or 5 years, with the exception of the 2019 season, and then like stack up just the way they played, just with your own eyeballs, how did it feel? They played faster, they played more physical, they looked like they knew what they were doing. And that was not the case for 2021, for 2020, and 2018, if you want to lump that season in there too. So like, that was different, that was better. But there are things that nitpick for sure. Like the big play touchdowns need to be curtailed. And I didn't include this in the story, but if you looked at the two Duke defenses, the 2 Oklahoma State defenses, and Ohio State's defense last year, they all gave up like a similar number of big plays, which I just counted as plays that were 40 yards or more. The thing that I didn't look up, because I just didn't want to take the time to do it, I guess, is how many of those big plays ended up being touchdowns for all those previous defenses. Because it feels like for Ohio State last year, all of them were touchdowns. And that was the problem. You can give up those big plays and rally, I think, which we saw them do at the beginning of the Notre Dame game last year. But when you get to the latter half of the year and every single one of them goes for a score, that's really tough to overcome. I don't really care how many points your offense is scoring. So those are the things they need to clean up. But there was definitely improvement last year. I would hope that people can come away from last year frustrated, certainly, with how it ended. And I know that perfection is expected a lot around Ohio State, and that's a high bar, and that's great. But they were definitely better, and I would hope people realize that.
How much of this do you think, guys, is just people, and I say this in the general term, like needing to understand that college football is different now than it was 15 years ago? I mean, if Marvin Harrison doesn't get knocked out of that game, Ohio State's going to score 50 points on Georgia, and like, Georgia's the best defense in the country, and they were going to give up 50 points to Ohio State. Like, is it an expectation now where in these big games, the ones that really matter, it is going to come down to almost always being a 45-42 type final, and you just have to make sure that you don't look bad along the way, or like that you take care of business to get there? Because it seems like these heavyweight programs are just going to exchange punches and knockout blow after knockout blow until someone falls over. And generally speaking, it's going to come down to the wire, it seems like, in these games.
I'm going to jump in, Bill. Sorry. When you were talking about Ohio State not putting away the Peach Bowl in the third quarter, like, that's what instantly came to mind. I don't want this to be the excuse or rationalization or justification episode, but like, what if you put Marvin Harrison and Cade Stover back out there? I'm not sure that Ohio State ever stopped scoring against Georgia. And that leads me to like what I think was Ryan Day's overall shift in hiring Jim Knowles, is somebody who, and I've said this a bunch of times, can get you three and outs, maybe a interception and a strip sack and a fumble, and like, that's it, to hold serve 5 times for the offense. And that would have led to a blowout against Georgia, or at least a similar score to what happened to the TCU Michigan game in the other playoff. Like, that's probably going to be the way that these competitive games in the playoff shake out, because the skill level and the rules make it so much easier for offenses than defenses. All you have to do is win a couple times, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think even like Nick Saban said something to that effect a couple weeks ago. He's come around on that idea, and he's maybe the best defensive coach ever. It's tailored to the offense to do the elite offenses, right? Like, you play Indiana, you're going to win 50-0. But when you get on the field against the Georgias and the Alabamas and maybe the USCs of the world, now that they're on the up, I think that's more than likely going to be the case. can you string together 2 or 3 consecutive stops? I don't think there's any expectation that you're going to shut down an elite offense in college football for the entirety of a game. It's can you string together a couple stops and then capitalize on those opportunities when you have the ball, when you're kind of in one of those runs. It's not, I guess, all that dissimilar from like the idea of basketball. And I think one of the things that was maybe enticing about Jim Knowles is that he is hyper aggressive, and big plays come with that. But I think the trade-off is he's hyper aggressive. Like, he's going to get a team off the field in 90 seconds and get the ball back to your offense and get the ball back to Ohio State's offense to get more to the point and watch that offense go down the field and score. Like, I think there was an imbalance within the program, I think, with how aggressive the offense wanted to be and how sort of passive the defenses were in Ryan Day's first couple of years. And now I think they're both on level footing ideologically and both want to be the aggressor. And there's some trade-off with that, but I think you're better off operating that way, because I think the only way to kind of make a difference in these big matchup games, like the Georgias and the Michigans of the world, is to be aggressive to the point on defense where you are stealing a couple of possessions and getting the ball back to your offense.
I think for a lot of people, the best Ohio State defenses in history have traditionally been bend, don't break, and that is different now. And right now it is all or nothing, it feels like at times, and that may be hard for people to swallow. And that's why you see what Georgia did and why they're considered so good on defense, even against Ohio State. Ohio State had to go out of its mind a couple times to score those touchdowns they got last year against Georgia. The offense was moving the ball well. CJ Stroud was playing out of this world, and Marvin Harrison's not from this planet, so it doesn't seem like it's hard for him. But for everyone else, like, that was a grinded out 500 yards of offense for Ohio State. And so that's fine, I think, and people will accept that. But when you give up the big play, the 75-yard touchdown pass, when you have a safety guarding the fastest wide receiver on the team for Georgia, or when you have tough Borland trying to cover Devontae Smith, like, that's where I think people have looked at the Ohio State defense in the last few years and said, what are we doing here? This doesn't make any sense. And so my question, Bill, as you evaluate this, and Austin, I guess, the same thing, like, is this a matter of Ohio State trying to do too much when they should just be relying on the fact that they have the best talent in the country to just get the ball back to the offense?
No, I don't think so. I mean, again, depending on who you're playing, I guess that could be the case. But in the matchup games, no, I think you need to do more than just sort of roll the ball out there and hope you bow up in the end zone and hold them to a field goal. I think you need to be the aggressor on defense the way that Jim Knowles has demonstrated he wants to do.
I don't know. I think that's a hard one for me to answer. Like, the coverage in the Michigan game when Cam Brown let somebody get away was fine. Like, it was going to be like pretty close to the first down stick, may have been short of it, and he just let a tackle get away. Like, I don't think that there was a breakdown in scheme, and I don't think that Lathan Ransom is incapable of being in coverage against a fast wide receiver. He happened to slip on that one. I don't think it was because he's a bad player or not a good athlete. That's why I say, like, when I take together my entire evaluation of the year, I don't feel like it was a bad plan from Jim Knowles or he got too aggressive. And maybe my opinion of it is wrong. That would be fine too. I think Jim Knowles himself has said that there are some calls that he has looked at that maybe he could have done things differently. You look at some of the busted coverages and communication breakdowns in Michigan. We can certainly see that later on. Game might have been different if Cam Brown makes a tackle or if Lathan Ransom doesn't slip. So I'm not pinning that on Jim Knowles or even those players specifically. Like, they happen in games. They didn't recover. They led to 2 explosive touchdowns. They happened. They're on the record. But did it mean to me that Jim Knowles had to drastically change his approach or blow everything else up? To me, I would say no, and I think that that's how he feels as well.
I don't disagree with that entirely. I do wonder, everyone's like, in hindsight, you look at it and go, well, if we could change the play to not give up a touchdown, then let's change the play to not give up a touchdown. Like, that makes sense.
It's a good plan. Yeah, that's a good plan.
Let's do the not give up a 70-yard touchdown play. I think that it was a situation a year ago. We talked about it. I mean, in all of these position previews, reviews, etc. Like, there is a lot of different thoughts when you're a first-year guy coaching a group of people you don't know, understanding the pressure when you walk into a situation and it's national championship or bust. I think that there is a a sense of I have to do more than I need to do. And I do feel at times like Jim Knowles probably overextended the defense in a way to just say, we're going to go make a splash. And when you have the Ohio State offense, you don't need to do that. Like, you just need to get off the field without giving up points. And that is where things, I think, get muddled for people, because you're watching that Georgia game, and if you just stick in your base zone defense that you ran all third quarter, Georgia, at least with the ball at their 25-yard line, is going to have to drive down the field to score a touchdown. And they had trouble doing that in the third quarter. So when you open a door for a national championship defending team, and it shouldn't be a surprise when they kick it open and eat your lunch. You know what I mean? Like, and I think when you're coming from a place like Oklahoma State or Duke, you're not used to that scene and that setting. And so I think you're like, oh, well, we'll just riverboat gamble it. And you don't have to do that in that instance.
I think that is right. I think there's probably a balance to it. Like, I don't think you lean all the way passive. I don't think you lean all the way aggressive. Like, you don't play goal line defense in the fourth quarter when the opponent has the ball, like, on their own 20-yard line, for instance. But there are other, yeah, it did. Yeah. But I think those are the kind of things that Jim Knowles has been ruminating on since they happened. And it's not just about what the players on the field can do. I think it's about Jim Knowles tweaking his process a little bit as they try to make a jump here. And I think he has admitted that he probably did not press all the right buttons last year.
But what's a realistic expectation for growth this season? Is it positionally? Is it the defensive line gets more sacks? Is it the linebackers are rotated more? Is it that the cornerbacks actually have an interception this season? Like, where do you get growth that impacts this in a way that people will say, you know what, this is actually a better defense than it was a year ago?
I think, like, general havoc plays. So, like, everything you just listed, they didn't have very many takeaways last year. I think they've had fewer, or like the same number of takeaways they had last year as they had the year before. Sacks and TFLs, I think, were pretty similar. I think that's the next step for them. I don't know, like, statistically, I don't know what it looks like. If they're top 20, I think they're okay. But if they're a team that can live in the backfield a little more, take the ball away a little more than they did last year, then I think that's how you measure growth.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the outside, I think the evaluation is going to be if Ohio State wins a championship or not.
Yeah, or that.
I mean, because the numerical statistical growth already existed in year one, and it was still easy to look at both of the losses and say it was the defense that kept Ohio State from winning championships. And I'm not sure, and Bill mentioned this early on, I don't think that's entirely fair or accurate. There are a lot of other things that factored into that for Ohio State coming up short in those two games, both of which they were in position in the first half to beat Michigan and could have done that quite handily, and were certainly well on the way to doing that to Georgia in the Peach Bowl. It's like, I don't know. I think the only way that people will evaluate this season, and this will be true for Ryan Day, this will be true for Jim Knowles, this is going to be true for Kyle McCord if he wins the starting job, is if they win the Big Ten and how close they can get to winning another national championship. And anything else, we're probably going to find ways, because we talk about this program 365 days a year, we'll be able to find things to point to say that's, they came up short and this is the reason for that. The only way to do that and remove that from the conversation, which is not even the fair way to do it, because it's really hard to win a national championship or a Big Ten championship anymore, is to evaluate that by putting up banners. And I don't know any other way.
Yeah. I do think that because the offense has been so good in the last 7 years and the defense has been so inconsistent and bad at times, that people leap to the conclusion that it's all the defense is the problem. And we can all go back and watch the second half of that Ohio State-Michigan game, and the first 25 minutes of first 22 minutes of that second half, the offense did not show up and the defense did. So outside of the first touchdown they gave up in the open half, the Georgia game, after Marvin and Cade Stover go out of the game, everything changes a little bit. You don't have Mayan Williams, you don't have Trevion Henderson. That things change quite a bit. And I don't think anyone wants to say, well, it's both parts. Both parts were the problem, but both parts were the problem. And you don't win games without offense and defense showing up, and you don't lose games without offense and defense both failing at times. So, I mean, we can go back to 2018 in the Purdue game when Dwayne Haskins throws for 475 yards. but the offense kind of stunk that day. Like you don't
they were
really
like 0 for 5 in the red zone in that game.
So it is, that is, as Bill said earlier, the beauty of statistics. You just grab the ones you want and say, well, look. But the fact is, we can all remember what we saw. They couldn't score in the red zone against Purdue. So it doesn't matter how good Dwayne Haskins was from between the 20s that day.
Remember when they threw bubble screens on like 3rd and 4th and goal in that?
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. It didn't really work, did it?
Weird day. Nope, sure didn't.
That's another crazy tangent. We don't need to go down that.
Maybe that's a Freaky Friday episode in the future. The worst plays we've ever seen Ohio State run.
Well, we are going to have a mailbag on Freaky Friday this week because it's the end of June, and why not? There's not the coaches are on vacation. The players are off for the 4th, I believe. They're not going to be doing workouts right now. So we got to do something, and that means mailbag time. Berm has already submitted his question, which is the worst plays that we've ever seen from Ohio State. That could be the whole show right there. I don't know how fun that would be for anybody. They might click stop right away. I don't want to relive that. We don't need to pull off Band-Aids or pour salt in the wound, but I don't know. It sounds like something Berm wants to do.
It does. It's not really.
Yeah.
Okay.
The person who would be most miserable from that is you. So I'm surprised you suggested it.
Well, I figured at some point people just like to hate watch me. So,
well, we'll see. We'll see what the questions.
Submit their questions on YouTube, or are we just doing those exclusively at OhioState.Rivals.com?
That's where we prefer to draw from. And if you're not a member there, use code DTE30 and get a free month on us. Submit some questions. That's the easiest place for us to corral them all. We can't just be chasing down. Well, we could, but we don't want to just follow up on Twitter or Instagram or YouTube comments. So if you could give us, try us out. Head in there. We'll start a thread on the Horseshoe Lounge message board. We'll be looking for questions for the Freaky Friday mailbag, a tradition unlike any other. And we'll be back to do that on Friday, doing it, live at 6 a.m, like we do every show. For Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham, I am Austin Ward. We'll talk to you later.